Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Ortiz. I'm the Outreach Director of Policy Matters Ohio, and welcome to Policy Matters Live. This is our Defend Our Dignity Exposing Dog Whistles Behind Senate Bill 17 edition. And while you may be joining us on Facebook, we are now also live streaming on YouTube and Twitter at Policy Matters OH. And we're really excited to grow the conversation with you today and to keep our community informed. So please like and subscribe. And today I'm excited because I'm joined by some really great friends. First off, I'd like to introduce tremendously talented organizer Brittney Madison, who does important work with North Ohioans for budget legislation equality, or NOBLE if you know him. And also here today to talk to you about food as a basic human right, my friend Kimberly LoVano, who's Director of Advocacy and Public Education at Greater Cleveland Food Bank. And last but certainly not least, my colleague Will Petrik, who's a budget researcher here at Policy Matters, who's also just a passionate advocate and really works hard to center people as we talk about how we're going to shape our future together. So, we are all here today to discuss some really wrong-headed legislation in Senate Bill 17. And we're also going to be talking about what all of us can do right now to defend our dignity. Now, at Policy Matters Ohio, we're fond of saying people are the economy, and that our budget is an extension of our values. And if we don't see policies that prioritize people, then what are we allowing certain politicians to say we value? Now, we believe that we can cultivate an economy in which all people have security, dignity, and prosperity in this crisis and beyond. We have the power to make that happen together. But we see Senate Bill 17 creates new barriers to accessing healthcare, food, and it makes it harder for people who were laid off to get by. This legislation would harm Ohioans all races, especially Black and brown people who are our neighbors. And this bill would also contradict Governor DeWine's Minority Health Strike Force, which calls for policymakers to acknowledge racism as a public health crisis and include equity in the policymaking process. Now, you may have noticed that line in our title about dog whistles. To explain that, there essentially are people who create coded messages that trick us into a false sense of insecurity, the feeling that you or your status may be under threat. It starts with messages and talking about things like fraud or programmatic abuse, but then it goes further to separate us from fully seeing each other, questioning who belongs. And those messages keep us from embracing policies that could help all of our communities thrive. Now, right now, I'm in the middle of reading Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us. And I'm just going to say it's a great book and y'all should definitely read it. But it also starts with a question. Why can't we have nice things? And answers some of that and follows up by explaining the idea that many of us are bought in and manipulated by a theory known as the zero-sum theory. It's this false idea that equity for your neighbor is a loss for you. And it's further reinforced by racially charged feelings that if resources become shared, somehow your cut shrinks. And ideas like this make people feel a lot of ways, but worst of all, they keep our communities divided. But rest assured, making sure everyone can get enough to eat, that people can get by if they're laid off, that people can see a doctor if they get sick, isn't just the right thing to do. It's good for everyone. It's good for all Ohioans. So, we believe that, when we invest in helping our neighbors overcome challenges, that really helps to make all of our communities stronger. And I believe that we can work together to build trust and cross-racial and cross-class solidarity, but it's going to take a lot of work. And that starts with a story we tell about ourselves, about our country, and our communities coming together. We have the power to act and the power to defend our dignity. You know, the issues that we take a stand for in this legislative session can create a budget with improvements for everyone. Adequately funded schools, reliable public infrastructure, strong wages that keep workers out of poverty, and programs that offer public support like food aid, unemployment compensation, and a robust public health system to get us through this pandemic are what we need. That is why we fight. With that, I'm going to take us to our beautiful panel and start off with a first introduction question. So speaking order is going to be as such. We're going to hear from Brittany first, then we're going to hear from Will, and then we'll hear from Kimmy. But I'd love to hear from y'all, if you could share with the audience, what got you into this work? Or to say it another way, why do you fight? So starting with Brittany. And I believe okay, we can hear you.
I'm going to keep it simple, sweet, short. Basically, as you can see, I am a Black woman, and I also identify as queer. And therefore, I know what it's like to be discriminated against, for policies to be made that impact me directly. And therefore, I do this work. I do this work for a selfish reason, because I know that by doing this work and improving the lives of others, my life will be improved in the process.
Beautifully stated. Will?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Hey, everyone. Just thanks for organizing this. Thanks for having me. My name is Will Petrik. I'm the budget researcher with Policy Matters Ohio. Why I do the work. So I had one of my classes in college was philosophy of self, and my professor asked us on the first day of class, who are 5 people that have like made an impact on you and made you who you are? And not going into all 5, but my mom has been a huge impact on me. You know, she's a music teacher, a lifelong music teacher. She believes music will change the world. She loves teaching and learning and kids. And I would, you know, throughout my childhood was in the choir, was in band. And one of the songs that we sang in the children's choir was, "One small voice can teach the world a song. Start with one small voice till another joins along." So my college self, like in thinking about my mom and her passion and this thing that she touched so many kids and families with, you know, for me, it was just like, what's my passion? What do I want to put out into the world? And, you know, through my efforts, learned about this whole, like, a small group of people can change the world, right? It like connects back to that one small voice. But just believing in people and our ability to help shape our communities, to help shape our future, and, you know, bring justice, social and economic justice. So that, I think, is, you know, generally what keeps me going, what brings me to the work.
Excellent. Kimmy?
Oh, can you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
good. So I'm actually with Will. My mom inspired me for pretty much every aspect of my life, but I grew up with my mom and grandma until I was in my teenage years, and my grandma couldn't work, so my mom worked full time, and then after her full time job, she would go and wait tables, working part time. And in the midst of all of that, she would take college classes, and she would just work 16 to 18-hour days, and it was still not enough to fully thrive. It was just enough to get by and survive. And she made so many sacrifices so that we could, you know, have a roof over our heads and have food on the table, and so that I could have a good education and go to college. And that was always her dream, was to graduate with a degree. So I think for me, I do it for that reason, because I see so many folks coming to our food programs every day, and they have the same stories. We serve at our food bank 400,000 people in our 6-county service area, and I know a lot of the same stories come out of the folks that we're serving. And I don't think I'm a dreamer, but I truly think that if someone's working 16-hour days, they shouldn't just be surviving. I think they should be thriving. And I also just firmly believe that food is an absolute basic human right. You can't survive without food. And we need to make it easier for people to access the food that they need to survive and to thrive. So that's why I do the work.
Awesome. I'm so grateful to be in this work with y'all. Just to share my own reflection, I grew up in very much a social justice Catholic household, right? It was this idea that, if you want peace, you work for justice, and really connecting kind of our values, what we believed in our faith. And by extension, I was very grateful to grow up in a faith community with, clergy that were there and supportive in a big family in the parish I grew up in. It was started by, Trinitarian missionary priests back in the 60s. And I think about that connection from these Irish Catholic priests to the majority Latinx community that I grew up in. And those investments in me are something that I always felt the need to pay forward. And it's kind of stuck with me. When I was in college, I was torn between studying economics and liberation theology. And I think I tilted more towards liberation theology. And that's guided me on this path. And that belief, further reinforces just, why I believe so much in solidarity, right? And putting our faith in action. So that's what keeps me in this work. And while especially many this past year, I might question that faith. I think it's through acts and through, coming together in community that gets renewed. So just great to be here with y'all and great to be in this conversation. Hopefully we'll get some questions and maybe any viewers who want to share their connection to what gets you in this fight and what makes you want to do this work. We'd love to see that in the chat. But for the real substance of this conversation, I'm going to give y'all a little bit more time to elaborate on some of your thoughts around the legislation that we're talking about today, Senate Bill 17. And again, starting with Brittany. First, again, thank you for your awesome work that you do with Noble. And I just want to, shout out that both you and one of Noble's members, one of y'all's leaders, provided testimony against Senate Bill 17 this week. Maybe you could start by just telling us why it's important for you and for members of Noble to speak out against this legislation.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I will speak specifically to the portions of the bill that impact our membership, and that's the Medicaid and SNAP provisions. I'll start by giving some background on Noble for you to understand all of this. Noble is an organization, it's a coalition of individuals and organizations that advocate for ourselves and others who are consumers of state health and human services programs. Our coalition consists of many folks that happen to be low-income citizens, and they are the most impacted by cuts or negative changes at the state, local, and federal levels to such programs, as I stated, Medicaid and SNAP. And that's just to name a few. At Noble, we have a platform agenda that we utilize and we work towards. It outlines our policy goals in the biennium budget and beyond. I'll start with that. At Noble, we understand that benefits like SNAP and Medicaid are critical and they're lifelines for many. I'll point to some numbers. Whereas Medicaid it covers 25% of the state's population, or that equates to 3 million Ohioans, including 1.25 million children. And then from November of 2020, we know that 625,000 children were able to access food assistance through the SNAP program in Ohio. So I'll go back to our platform agenda. In our agenda, we express our wishes for the Medicaid program in that we would like to see it remain intact, free from provisions like work requirements, co-payments, and premiums. While the SNAP program is not directly reflected in our platform, we have done ample amounts of work in an effort to improve the application process. As an organization, we feel that Senate Bill 17 is counterproductive. So that applying for and accessing benefits should be simple for those that qualify. Provisions like photo ID on benefits cards and work requirements only create barriers to this access. As it relates to the photo ID, our member Larry Rodriguez highlighted in his testimony that folks often times rely on others for grocery shopping. This is completely innocent, just as something that happens. So I'll also share some results from the Urban Institute as it relates to photo ID on benefits cards. And they say that through their research, they found that SNAP benefits are designed to be used by, well, they state that SNAP benefits are designed to be used by the entire household, not just head of the household, or even family members with the same last name. About a third of SNAP caseloads are elderly or disabled. These individuals can appoint a caregiver who doesn't even live in the household to buy food with the EBT card. Therefore, a single photo ID would not represent all legitimate users of the card. Second, federal regulations prohibit retailers from treating SNAP customers any different than other customers. So this would just create longer lines and liabilities. And finally, photo IDs won't stop the main type of trafficking that supposedly this bill would address. A lot of retailers are complacent with fraud as it relates to food stamps, and having a photo ID on this card would not make any difference. As it relates to the work requirements, those are also not justified. Poor able-bodied adults are already working. They just happen to be less consistently connected to the job market than the non-poor. By adding work requirements as opposed to other measures that support existing work efforts of the poor, likely to hurt present living standards and their kids' future mobility. Programs like nutritional programs, health, housing, et cetera, make it easier for low-income persons to be able to hold jobs, et cetera. And we believe investments should be made there instead. Now I'm talking a lot, so I'll just get to the point. We don't think that the photo IDs and or the work requirements are beneficial in any way to these programs, and therefore Noble really was concerned and felt the need to speak up and go testify as it relates to this bill. And I'll take it one step further. We instead invite lawmakers to invest in programs such as public transportation if they feel that working is an issue. By investing in things like public transportation, folks will have the ability to get to work and earn gainful employment.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that, Brittany. And thank you for really hitting home those points on ID cards, EBT cards. Just maybe a little follow-up. I think that you really outlined so well how this legislation can hurt people who can afford it least. If there's anything else you want to share about specific ways that people may be impacted, or also, I mean, if there are other actions that you would encourage people to take, especially those who, may have themselves or have a family member or a friend who may be impacted.
And I didn't speak to the changes in eligibility that will be reflected in this bill because I am not comfortable speaking to that, but I do know that those changes will additionally hurt our membership. But like I said, we're more concerned with how the work requirements, those could hurt folks that are older. A lot of our membership, this would increase the age to 65 where folks would have to work. And we have members that are that age that just simply it cannot work. And there might not be documentation to say that, but we know that they cannot and should not have to work to receive benefits. And as it relates to the photo ID, Larry's story, I mean, even though there are exemptions, his story still points to the fact that there are folks that may not be able to personally go to the grocery store themselves, but are not in any way engaging in any fraudulent activity. So yeah, those are the three things I would point to.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm with you that those work requirements just don't work. So no, with that, I'm going to pivot to my colleague, Will. Will, in your testimony, you highlight the disproportionate impact Senate Bill 17 will have on Black and Appalachian Ohioans. Now, what would you like people to know about this? And specifically, if you could draw any other connections around the dog whistles in the approach to this legislation?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think, first on like, what would I want people to know about this legislation is, it disproportionately, it will, or if in effect, it would disproportionately harm Black and Brown Ohioans. So Brittany talked about a few of the different provisions. The ultimate impact is really making it harder for people to access food assistance, to access support for healthcare through Medicaid, but also unemployment compensation. So, broadly, this is what the proposed legislation will do is put up barriers and even make it easier for people to get pushed off of those critical programs. And I think one important thing that we need to bring into consideration is we're in the middle of a global pandemic, right? Like this has impacted everyone across the state and across the world. And there's also an economic recession like I've never seen in my lifetime. Tens of thousands of people are out of work, and many people have been laid off through no fault of their own. And so many families are out there. It's like trying to basically support their families. They're trying to pay the rent, put food on the table, just to make ends meet. And I think a critical part that's hasn't been discussed as much around this legislation is, the pandemic disproportionately hurt Black Ohioans. And that's not due to individual choice or a lack of personal responsibility. There's a history of policies of exclusion and policies of segregation, discrimination, choices, again, that lawmakers have made that have excluded Black Ohioans from building wealth, from building financial security, from housing opportunities, from educational opportunities. And so, this is part of the context that's really important. And then this legislation gets introduced that basically says, if this was in effect today, you don't deserve support for food and support for healthcare. And so Senate Bill 17 would exacerbate these issues. It would also, again, disproportionately impact Black and Brown Ohioans. And the reason for that is because Black Ohioans are disproportionately, have been impacted by all these policies, are disproportionately poor and in poverty. And so they participate at a higher rate. That being said, if you look at the total population of people participating, say, in the SNAP program, the food assistance program in Ohio, the vast majority of people participating in SNAP are white. But again, it disproportionately, the participation includes Black folks. So anything that's a threat to Medicaid or SNAP will disproportionately impact Black and Brown Ohioans. So we actually put out a map that highlights across the state, how many folks in your community and in your state Senate district participate in SNAP, how many people participate in the Medicaid program, because these are our neighbors, right? Again, the overall goal that we have is security and stability for all Ohioans, regardless of what you look like, where you live, what your race is. It's about basic human dignity and defending our dignity. So I think that's one thing that's really important, and invite people who are listening in to check out those maps. It also highlights that people in Appalachia are also going to be disproportionately impacted, and that's in part due to the high rates of poverty in Appalachia. There's, again, more participation in the SNAP program and in the Medicaid program. So I think that's really important to understand. The other thing, Daniel led with this whole concept of dog whistle. So there's both how would this bill actually impact people? And then there's also, I think, a deeper question around the opposition that's kind of advancing this bill. There's a whole communication strategy and a whole strategy behind this. And I think one of the things that's important is regardless of if you live in Athens or if you live in Akron or Zanesville or Cincinnati, we all want the same things for ourselves and our family. We all want peace of mind. We all want to put food on the table. and be able to go see a doctor when we need to. But certain corporate interests and certain politicians are pushing Senate Bill 17 to eject barriers to healthcare and food. And basically it's about trying to divide us and point fingers oftentimes at Black and brown Ohioans or folks with low income. And so when they advance this legislation, they use different terms that trigger for the public. Daniel mentioned the word fraud. So if you look at the testimony on Wednesday, it was amazing. Like 50 people came in and testified in opposition. And the sponsor of the bill, nearly every person who came up to testify, he asked this question about fraud. And what the strategy is there again is, different people in the public, when they hear that word, might have a racial connection to it, or might also think about a negative concept of government, like government's inefficient and ineffective. And both of those lead toward a lack of support for these programs that are critical, right, towards SNAP and Medicaid and unemployment compensation. And also, again, it's a scapegoat. It's pointing fingers and trying to divide us. And so, at the end of the day, I think it's really important for all of us to continue to keep the focus on, like, we have to protect people and support people and communities. And we have to, do everything that we can to have a strong recovery, particularly for those who have been most harmed by the recession, those Black and brown communities and folks with low income. So I think there's both, like, again, the actual impacts of the bill, and then there's also this broader strategy of almost like shaping the communications and the public narrative. My colleague Caitlin has done a lot of work on what's called the race-class narrative. But basically, like, the narrative is what frames what's politically possible for policy. It's what frames the policy debate. So it also impacts policy outcomes. So that's something that we just want to make everyone aware of. But also, Daniel's book, I think that he mentioned at the top, has a lot of strategies for how do we actually talk about this.
No, that's great, Will. Thank you for that information. One thing I do want to share, I know that this is the first, we're reaching folks on a lot of different platforms, but as Will was talking, we began to link to certain content. All links will be available either in the comments or in the description, depending on platform. But we've posted Will's blog that has the maps that he was referencing, as well as a link to the Race Class Academy that's been developed in a great series of videos there to more fully understand how certain politicians use these racist dog whistles. So with that, just wanted to call that out, but also maybe a follow-up question for Will. I might come back depending on seeing if there's any that may be popping up in the chat. But first, I would love if you could just share what may be some opportunities for people watching today to learn more about the budget process and how to engage their legislators.
Yeah, so I think one great opportunity is we're partnering with Brittany and Noble 2 weeks from today at the same time. So not this next Friday, but the following Friday at 1 o'clock, we're hosting another event. It's called Shape the Future of Ohio, Ohio Budget Basics. So it's basically going to be a conversation about, learning more about the state budget and learning more about how you all can have a voice in that, right? It's like, this is our budget, this is our communities and our future. And so that'll be a great opportunity to learn more.
Good deal. And speaking of learning more, I know, there's in the story of, who is pushing legislation like Senate Bill 17. Could you share more on maybe some of the outside organizations or people who are pushing this legislation, and actually to make this a twofer, if you wanted to say anything else about the type of harm that this will inflict on Ohio's economic recovery?
I'm going to start with the recovery question and then talk about who all's behind this. I think one of the things that is, again, like I led with talking about the recession and the pandemic. So I think it's really critical to understand why SNAP and why Medicaid and why unemployment compensation are so critical during a recession. There's been a lot of research looking at the last recession and about how particularly federal resources that come in, through unemployment compensation, through SNAP, that's money that folks need to support their families. And it's also money that people put right back into the economy at the grocery store to pay the basics. So there's the research out there shows that basically $1 billion, if that was infused through the SNAP program into households, would generate $1.54 billion in GDP. So if we think about, again, security for families, recovering, helping recover from this pandemic and from the recession, it's critical to have those resources flowing into our state. And this bill basically prevents that or slows resources from flowing to people and to communities that need it most. So I think it's really critical, again, that we stop Senate Bill 17 and more broadly, advance an agenda that's really going to support a strong recovery for all Ohioans, regardless of race, regardless of income or zip code. To your point, Daniel, about who is behind this, I encourage people to look up the Foundation for Government Accountability, FGA. So this is a group. If folks are familiar with ALEC, ALEC is a group that basically is connected to lawmakers all across the country, and they introduce kind of cookie cutter legislation, and oftentimes it's damaging for people and communities. And so FGA similarly, while in their goals they say it's about waste, fraud, and abuse and government accountability, oftentimes the policies that they're proposing, the actual outcome is about trying to basically do away with the safety net and our health and human service infrastructure, programs like SNAP, Medicaid, unemployment compensation. So we see it as a threat to people and to our state and to communities. But there's a couple articles. I know Lisa from the Ohio Association of Food Banks brought up in her testimony an article, I think, from Vox. But there's another article that shows like the financing and all the funding behind the Foundation for Government Accountability. And it's, at the end of the day, it's like super duper wealthy interests. And so again, going back to kind of these dog whistle tactics, oftentimes it's out of state millionaires and billionaires that are pushing these type of policies to try to divide us against each other. And so we really need to kind of fight for, again, dignity for all people, and push back against this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will. And it looks like I'm seeing in the chat some articles that are being shared by some of other folks in our coalitions, as well as there's the Advocates for Ohio's Future Sign-On Letter link there. So for folks especially joining on Facebook, there's some resources in the chat. But next up, I would love to hear from my friend Kimmy. So Kimmy, I guess my question for you is, knowing all the great advocacy that you lead and how very vital it is, especially, how important it is to cities like Cleveland, right? The poorest major US city, but also to our state. With your work, you have a real deep understanding of what is happening at also the federal level as well as the state level. And with that knowledge, I guess, what can you tell us about the state of food aid in Ohio at this moment?
Sure. So I thought I would talk first about what's working and then transition into what's not working, and what would be made even worse by this bill. So kind of what's working right now, Congress last year pushed forward a number of policies to help families struggling to make ends meet during the pandemic, and Americans in general. So folks who received SNAP benefits should have received an increase to those benefits. They should have received the maximum benefit based on their household size, which was a huge relief to so many of the families that we serve here at the food bank, because it means that they can take their benefits and go to the grocery store. And that is something, I saw something pop up in the chat about how SNAP helps our GDP and helps stimulate the economy. And that's one of the ways. It's through, if someone's going to the grocery store with their EBT card and spending dollars, you're employing the grocery store cashier, the person who's stocking the shelves, the truck driver who's delivering that food, the manufacturer who's producing it, the farmer. It all goes, and I think that cycle really never ends. And there's a great study on that by Mathematica. If that person's interested, I don't have the link to it on hand, but it's a really helpful way to understand the way that the food chain works. So SNAP was one of the big ways that the federal government has helped. That was led by Congress. There was also the pandemic EBT program, which specifically helped families who had kids who were impacted by school closures from the pandemic. So if a kid wasn't in school getting a free or reduced price meal, they could get pandemic EBT benefits, which was just grocery dollars put on their EBT card, or they got a PEBT card in the mail. So that was in place for the end of last school year. It's in place for this school year as well. And that's a federal program that's administered by the state. That was led by our very own Congresswoman Marcia Fudge up here in the Cleveland area. She was a big champion behind that. And we were so grateful to see that. I know for a lot of the families that we serve, we heard repeatedly how much of a help that was. Now, what we're seeing on the ground here in Cleveland, I can tell you, since the pandemic started, we've seen 52,000 new families come to us for emergency food assistance. And those are people who have never received help from one of our emergency food partners before the pandemic started. So that's all since last March. At the same time in our state, we're seeing 1 in 4 Ohio kids are food insecure, which is completely unacceptable. Up here in the Cleveland area, it's almost 1 in 3. So I could probably go on a long tangent about that. So I'll stop myself on that note. But when we're talking about what is not working when it comes to food aid, I think a lot of people understand the way that public benefits work and how you have to apply to receive these benefits. But what I don't think a lot of folks who have not received public benefits know is how hard it is to actually receive that benefit. It is not as simple as calling up a caseworker and saying, I'm having a hard time paying for my groceries. I really need help. I can tell you that I need it. And then you get a card in the mail. It is the exact opposite. So if you're applying for SNAP benefits, and Rachel Cahill, who testified on Wednesday, had a really, really great explanation of all of the things that you have to do. I encourage folks to read that if you're interested in learning more. But some of the things that you have to prove, and by prove, I mean you have to submit paperwork showing this, is your identity, your address, your age, your employment or unemployment status, what is your income, what's your disability status, your citizenship, if you have any assets, and other expenses. And then you also have to go through an interview process. So it's not like it's a really simple process for people to go through. And so what we see here at the food bank, we help people apply for SNAP over the phone. And we see a lot of people fall off during that application process. So these are people who are income eligible for SNAP benefits and who need to feed their families, and they're not even able to access this benefit, and they're eligible for it. So I think that is one of the biggest hurdles that I see when it comes to food aid. We have all of these great policies that are coming down from the federal level, especially during the pandemic. But if people in our state are not able to access these benefits, we have a whole other discussion. And that's where I think we really need to talk about what the end goal goal is our end goal making sure that everyone in our community has access to nutritious food? And if that is our end goal, then we need to really change the way that this system works. And we need to have a discussion about that. So I think that gets into all of the pieces that I wanted to make sure that I talked about, but I'm not sure, Daniel, if you had any other questions.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Kimmy. I think, especially for sharing those points about the application experience. I think, that struggle is so very real. And with the pandemic, so many more people have actually experienced that for the first time. But I did have a follow-up. You do talk about food as, a basic human right. And I'm right there with you. I believe that. But I guess also just thinking about that message and, for other advocates, how could they think about sharing that message when they talk to elected officials to make the case for food aid programs? And also, if there are any tools that folks should know about that they can use to engage their elected legislators.
Yes. So I think one thing that I have found helpful is to just be really honest and clear with your elected officials and just with the community in general, with your neighbors, your friends, your family. Talk about what is our end goal. Do we want a community where no kid goes to bed hungry? Do we want a community where no one, period, goes to bed hungry? And the answer should be yes. And if the answer is yes, then I think it's a lot simpler to have that discussion of, well, how do we get there? And from a food bank perspective, we get there by ensuring people have access to the food that they need to stay healthy. And that means, so for SNAP benefits, for folks who don't know, that program is such a it is the cornerstone of the anti-hunger network. For every one meal that's provided by food banks, SNAP provides 9. So, we can't really food bank our way out of this issue. Food banks are there as a temporary kind of stopgap to make sure that people have food on the table and they're always able to access the food that they need. But we need to have a real discussion about SNAP. So I think when talking to elected officials about anti-hunger work, you cannot do it without talking about accessing that critical benefit. I also think you can't do it without talking about some of the other struggles that folks are facing, because if you're facing food insecurity, chances are you're also facing an issue, maybe as it relates to health, your employment, your low wages, reduced hours at work, housing issues. So I think just being really clear about what the end goal is, finding that common ground. No one believes that someone should go hungry. At least I genuinely hope that that is the case. I think that's one area where we can all agree. And if that is our end goal, let's be very clear about what steps we can take to get there. And I think most elected officials are very up for having that discussion. And I think it's really important that they understand what the impact will be on people in the community if a policy goes into effect. And I think that's a good example of with Senate Bill 17. If that policy goes into effect, what will actually happen? And the answer is people will fall off the program because there will be more hurdles. And we already know that there are hurdles for people to access benefits. We have the stats behind that. So let's talk a little bit differently about it. And actually, let's pivot and talk about what we can do to make sure more people that are eligible for SNAP can get on the program. So that's my thought behind how to really speak to our elected officials on that issue and just find that common ground and go back from there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And one thing I did want to shout out is that we did share your letter to elected official tool in the chat, at least on Facebook, and I think it's connected to the other platforms. And yes, we're getting some good questions. Stacy O'Brien had asked about a link to the information from Rachel, so we will be working on getting that information to you. But I do want to just keep this conversation moving forward, but we do appreciate questions. And again, if we're not able to answer them live right now, we will be following up with information and direct responses and posting those in the comments and the description section on the videos. But one last sort of group question to maybe get us ready for checkout for the whole group is, first, I just got to thank you all again for all that you do. But, you all testified or shared written testimony this week in opposition to Senate Bill 17. And I know from my limited experience of providing testimony that, that can seem so daunting. It seems like such a big, hill to climb, but, at least after having done it a few times, it sometimes is because you haven't done it before. So I'm going to ask y'all to tell a story. I'd love to hear, if you could share maybe a story of maybe your first time providing testimony, or a time that you gave testimony that was particularly memorable, or even, a powerful bit of testimony that you witnessed. So I think we're going to continue for consistency, going in the same order, and we will have Brittany lead off for us.
Yeah, so as I stated earlier, or I might not, I don't know if I stated in this particular live stream, but I did previously work at the State House for a couple of years. And even with that, I still, every time I go to the State House and have to testify, it's still the most intimidating thing in the world. So speaking to my membership, I am just, every time they testify on any issue, I am blown away. So I will say every time Noble testifies, I am thoroughly pleased. And I will point to another testimony that really touched me. Was actually, it happened at the Senate Bill 17 hearing. I was really impressed by Rachel Cahill's testimony and her ability to really know the facts and to use the facts against the people that are proposing these bills.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Brittany. Will, I think you're muted. Uh-oh.
How about this?
Yep, we got you.
Cool. I'm gonna pile on the Rachel Cahill love. To speak to Brittany's point, I think Rachel both had the facts down, and the thing that the media picked up were quotes that were specifically principles and beliefs. So I have it in front of me. So I'm just gonna kind of share the quotes that really spoke to me, and they were faith-based. So the other thing that I think is important is she was thinking about her audience. So the chair of the committee, Chairwoman Rogner, is a Catholic and leads every committee hearing with a prayer. And so here's the quote. So, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." And that was a scripture reading from the Gospel of Matthew. The other piece was from the Catholic bishops and their call to lawmakers during the pandemic to, quote, "promote the dignity and value of all human life and protect poor and vulnerable people who are most at risk." So this gets to Kimmy's no child should go to bed hungry. So I think those quotes both speak to the audience of lawmakers, but I think also broadly in the public, regardless of your religion, those are basic human life principles that I believe in, and that I'm just yes. And this bill is not about that. So I want to, definitely check out Rachel's testimony. I also think Brittany, your work and Larry's work, when people who are actually impacted by legislation talk about, this is going to actually impact me and my family and my life, that is so powerful. I'm with Policy Matters, and I love policy, and we need to have the policy and the research. And when it comes to testimony, I think having Noble is just so important in terms of y'all bringing in the real human experience. So thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Noble.
Thank you, Will.
Fantastic. No, awesome. Kimmy.
So I'll pile on the Rachel love. Rachel's fantastic and brilliant in every way. One of the smartest people I've ever met. So I can third that. But I would just say to people who are listening that have not given testimony before, sometimes when you watch it on video, you feel like people who are up there are just not nervous at all. They're so committed. I can tell you, I thought I was going to pass out for a whole list of reasons. I was really nervous because this is such a, this bill just brings out so many emotions in me. And it's hard to stay kind of centered and calm when you're talking about something that you're passionate on. So I would just encourage everyone. Testimony is something that any Ohio citizen can give. And I just think it's really, it's an important tool. It's something that's powerful. And if you feel nervous, it's completely normal. The State House is just a grand kind of place to be. So I think that's the part that intimidates me every time. I feel like I'm part of something that's more important than me, if that makes sense. And that just kind of terrifies me. Even though I've given testimony a few times. So that would just be my my input into that. And I think one thing I've seen that has always kind of stuck with me is when people talk about their personal experience with something. I think that's what people listen to, what they open up to, and I was just really grateful to have my coworker there who was just able to talk about that and brave enough to just go all in. So I think anytime you have a personal story to share on a piece of legislation, it's just a really powerful thing. And it's really brave of people to do if they're comfortable and feel safe doing so. So.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Kimmy. Now I'll just share my experience, which I think is a little different from folks who were providing testimony this week. It wasn't my first time giving testimony, but I have not done a tremendous amount of testimony. And I was at a field hearing in 2019 around the Voting Rights Act. It was a congressional field hearing, and I was a nervous wreck. And, I will just say one thing is that, while you may think about this as a solitary experience, I was able to get through that because of community. I relied on the community of folks I work with, other advocates, and was able to lean on folks and to get help, to get the extra sets of eyes and to review things and to be able to really tell a clear and compelling story to members of that committee. And honestly, I felt really good going into it. And then I think I had one of those first things that it's like when you're first in a fight and you get hit the first time. It was hostile questioning. And I'll tell you, replying to responses that do have that sort of racial dog whistle tone with dignity and patience, it's a challenge. But that's why we do this work. That's why we prep. That's why there's all these different resources, because it's one thing for some of us to go through it, but it's important that more of us get to know how to do it, because we really do need to make sure that our elected officials hear from all of us. So with that, I will lift back up that, we are doing a training series as a part of our Dignity for All work. And while we are going to be starting that off with the conversation on budget basics, I hope that we will also get to talking about, how we do testimonials and providing testimony. So love to engage y'all at that. And I think, I just want to share some of the, additional pieces that folks have mentioned in the call today. I think, we've got a lot of great resources on how we can educate ourselves, how you can read, again, some of the specifics and our partners here in all of our testimony, and learn and understand the data, because that's what we do, especially Policy Matters Ohio. We're all about that data. But I think, there's also a link that was recently shared on sharing those experiences with food insecurity, sharing your experience, if you've recently participated in the SNAP program, EBT program, PEBT program. I think that these are stories that we need to make sure we're capturing, and we're grateful to our friends at the Greater Cleveland Food Bank and the Ohio Association of Food Banks for providing those tools to capture that. But I'll just say in closing, I'm really, today's conversation renewed my belief in us. We can build a more equitable Ohio. It just takes trust and solidarity and work, right? But we have the power to act. We can do that. So let's not fall for certain leaders' attempts to shift blame onto our neighbors while they try to distract us from their failure to control the pandemic and the recession. So with that, please do take a second, click on some of these links, use this amazing tool to communicate with your state senators. Please, do review the videos on the Race Class Narrative Academy. Do follow our partners here. Hopefully we'll have links to all of their social media. There's also a lot of other great groups that are doing things, and from how things work at the State House to our other partners that we work with on the All In for Ohio campaign. There's a lot of things, and there's a big conversation that needs all of us to be engaged in. So we really do hope that y'all are able to engage with us, to grow this conversation with us, because all of our communities need to be represented and at the table. So with that, please sign up for our training. Please sign up for our e-news. And we look forward to engaging with y'all going forward through this budget legislative session.
Thank you.